Welcome to everybody who's coming back. My name is Anita Weiskup, and I am the Program Health Manager / Native American Health Liaison for the Office of Health Disparities and Health Equity with the state of Nebraska and part of the Division of Public Health. So if you joined us a little bit earlier with Solange on her operationalizing change at the organizational level, this is the deep dive breakout session. And we also have with us Stephani Tyrance, who is a project director for Human Impact Partners. Just as a reminder, we will have a Q&A discussion at the end of this. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box, not into the Q&A, but into the chat box. And I will be following along with those so that we can get those answered towards the end of the session. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Solange Gould and Stephani Tyrance. And I really look forward to hearing more on operationalizing change at the organizational level.
Good morning again. It was so nice to spend time with you all just previous to this. This next hour that we're together is going to be a chance for us to learn a little bit more about how we make the ideas that we just talked about hit the road. How do we make it actually take effect in our work? And so here I have a cover of a book that just came out where my co-director, Lily Farhang, and I wrote a chapter. The book is called Leading Systems Change in Public Health. And it has chapters written by diverse public health practitioners from across the field. It helps us develop a shared language for practitioners to discuss systems thinking. It outlines the key principles of systems change leadership, and it offers a comprehensive framework for individuals and organizations that want to lead systems change. Excuse me, our chapter is called Racial Justice and Power Sharing, the Heart of Leading Systems Change. And it draws on HIP's experience working with over 100 health departments and public health organizations to unpack the way that power operates within social systems and how systems change leaders like yourselves can center racial justice and power sharing at the heart of our practice. And we are in the midst of a massive racial reckoning in the United States. And it's as urgent as ever that public health grapples with how to support the movement for Black lives and other uprisings for liberation and organize around a vision of health that is truly equitable. And systems change leadership can be a critical step in that direction. And so I'm going to drop the link to our chapter in the chat, and I hope you'll take a read later. So let's move. I'm gonna go through a few of the things that we talk about in this book. I don't know if you all know Donella Meadows. She's an amazing systems thinker and doer. She says, no one can define or measure justice, democracy, security, freedom, truth, or love. No one can define or measure any value. But if no one speaks up for them, if systems aren't designed to produce them, if we don't speak about them and point towards their presence or absence, they will cease to exist. So this presentation today, we're going to present for about half of it, and then we're going to work with you in small groups in a Jamboard and have discussion for the second half. This presentation is organized around the following core principles and capabilities, which we propose based on our experience, which are develop a shared analysis about how power imbalances, racism, and other forms of oppression structure the systems that drive health, tend to the work of being together, not just doing together, to deepen the relationships necessary to disrupt these patterns at the interpersonal, team, organizational, and community levels, and model power sharing and center those who are most impacted in leading systems change. So the next slide, we say that systems change is inherently about leveraging and shifting power within a system to bring about any desired change. And systems change leaders must help groups clearly identify and perceive all of the locations and mechanisms of power so that we can collectively and proactively use it to advance health equity. And power sharing means widening and shifting the circle of people involved in systems change and in centering people who are most impacted by inequities. Systems change is inherently about leveraging and shifting power within a system to bring about any desired change. And so taking this even a step further, the act of power sharing must be understood as an end in and of itself in systems change. So I'm going to go back to some of the ideas that I talked about in the opening keynote. Some of the power that we have is around shifting worldviews, that narrative form of power. And so we can do this work by coming together with others to develop a shared analysis of how a system operates. And doing this is a hedge against any single entrenched or unconscious mental model dominating our systems change efforts. So indeed, developing a shared analysis of a system is a crucial first step of leading systems change work. And it's a prerequisite to developing solutions that actually solve systemic problems. Shifting worldviews is a critical element of long-lasting transformative change. And so how we understand the world is driven by our own mental models, who we are, our experiences, and our social position in existing systems. And so doing this work in your workplaces, it may appear that you are having theoretical conversations, but actually coming to a shared analysis by analyzing the systems you seek to change and being able to articulate that analysis together is a very important step. And we recommend doing it within your staff so that you have a very good buy-in within your staff of what you all mean. And then across government, maybe in your health and all policies efforts to come up with a shared analysis and articulation. And then with your community partners, so that when you meet with community partners, you have a real firm analysis and you can share it with them and you can see where they might converge so that you can work closely together. So we talk about the same power dynamics and hierarchies that arrange value, which are based on race, gender, class, and other dimensions of identity. They are present in the systems we want to change and in the interpersonal, team, organizational, and community relationships that drive systems change. And changing interpersonal, internalized dynamics to prioritize relationship development and trust building is an important part of doing this work, to build the capacity of individuals, teams, and organizations to change the system. I know from my over 20 years in governmental public health that it can be a very, very hard, sometimes brutal, sometimes punishing system to work in. And I think it's very important for systems change leaders to start to change that. The next part of this is talking about real change. And again, this is The Dawn of Systems Leadership by Peter Senge, Hal Hamilton, and John Kania. Real change starts with recognizing that we are part of the systems we seek to change. The fear and distrust we seek to remedy also exist within us, as do the anger, sorrow, doubt, and frustration. So we all have our own hard work to do. Systems leaders must foster collective leadership and ownership of the system and build the capacity of individuals, teams, and organizations to change the system. People created and maintain these systems, and it will take transformed people and relations to shift the systems. And we need to shift people's perspectives and relationships within the system because expanded perspectives and relationships allow us to enact systems change more profoundly and effectively and ultimately make transformations stick. So the heart of this work is to design change processes that in and of themselves challenge status quo dynamics. And for us, this comes down to two core practices: creating a container for our work together and reintegrating the head and heart. And in short, these ideas are what we mean when we put the values of racial justice and power sharing into practice in our relationships. And we like this image because we are all on this, in this circle in some places, and we shift around as we're doing this work. Some of us are in the growth zone, some of us where we're sitting with our discomfort, maybe educating our peers, not letting our mistakes deter us from being better. We can move into the learning zone. Even from time to time, we can move back into the fear zone where we deny racism is a problem, but all the time we're trying to reach towards that growth zone. And so this is a useful image that we have found can disarm people as they're starting to engage in these conversations. Okay, so we also talk about systems leaders. We talked about creating a container. What do we mean by creating a container? Basically, we mean creating the conditions in your work that can give rise to change and can allow change to become self-sustaining. And one way we do this is by creating a container, which is about constructing a shared working and thinking space that allows for an equitable set of dynamics and culture to emerge to help us tackle complex problems. This container acknowledges that we are all harmed by unjust systems and allows us to be simultaneously vulnerable, afraid, and brave. So there's a few key container setting practices that we think are crucial. Again, this is something that we really encourage you to do in your work, with your workmates, with your team. So start by establishing collective practices for people to share their personal stories, identities, and vulnerabilities in their work. And I modeled that a little bit in my opening talk. Next, create clear group communication agreements. What are your agreements to make sure that your communications are places where you can be safe, vulnerable, and brave? Explicitly name the physical and emotional dysregulation that comes with racial justice and systems change work. Give room for people to slow down and notice their own reactions. Create an accessible, welcoming, conscientious physical space to ground relationships. More about container setting. It's important to humanize the process and the participants in this work. It helps to build trust and groundwork for innovation. Container setting interrupts the systemic status quo and our public health practices culture of professionalism and risk aversion, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute. It helps create a space where everyone feels they belong, and it helps build the skills to work through conflict in a generative way. So we also talk about head and heart. And so what are some heart-centered practices? We tend to be very head-oriented in our public health practice. So some of the things we do that I also modeled this morning were breathing together, paying attention to how our bodies feel, developing a vocabulary to express what's happening bodily as we engage in this work. This is making my stomach hurt, my heart is beating fast, my head is tingling, etc. Considering how we ourselves have suffered the trauma of participating and living within harmful systems, listening deeply to those who have been most impacted, making space for shared reflection about how a body of work affects us as people, and normalizing the practice of noticing and being able to share whether we are emotionally regulated or not as we engage in this work. Okay. So one of the things that we can also do in systems change processes, leaders have enormous ability to influence how power and leverage are exercised. Systems change efforts are relational and involve negotiations between actors and agents of change with varying degrees of power. And so transforming systems requires transforming the balance of power and relationships among people who shape and experience the systems. So I think it's very important for those of us who have power in a public health system to model power sharing and centering those who are most impacted. And so what does power sharing in the systems change process mean? How do you do it? So there's a variety of ways that we have tools as well. We have a variety of tools that are going to come out around the end of May to more deeply dive into this. So I encourage you to keep an eye on our website to have access to these resources and tools. One of them is power mapping, to analyze who holds power over decision making, the influence they have, and how to target them for change. Those with power relinquish control and authority. Those with less leverage step into greater ownership and responsibility. And we widen and shift who is involved in sense making, setting the rules of the system, and determining the set of options to choose from. So that's that widening ecology of who is creating change with you. And importantly, power sharing in systems change is inextricably tied to racial justice by way of who is represented in change processes. Changing who is at the systems change table and transforming what that table even looks like And what is discussed at that table is itself a strategy to remedy the historic and ongoing injustices that have intentionally excluded Black, Indigenous, and other people of color from decision-making. This is about more than representation. It's about reparations. It's about bringing deep expertise, specificity about health inequities, and definition of root causes and impacts to the system's change process. It's information that we do not have access to oftentimes. So who's at the table reflects the goals. It should reflect the goals of the work, the topics that are prioritized, what data is collected, resource allocation, how policies are made and enforced, and who is accountable. A piece that is so very, very important is how we work with and forge alliances with community power building organizations to transform systems. Sometimes people call them community organizing groups, base building organizations. They are the people, the grassroots community organizations that are made up and represent people and communities most impacted by inequities. And they are a natural ally for systems change leaders seeking to change who's at the table, address racial inequities, and integrate a power sharing model. Community power building organizations focus already on redistributing power and decision-making by building power in communities most impacted by the social determinants we seek to change, by economic, political, health, and other inequities. So those are a few of the ideas in our chapter. I want to quickly go through some of the frameworks to think about this. Earlier, I referred to diffusion of innovation theory. This is one of the oldest social science theories, which explains how over time, an idea gains momentum and diffuses through a specific population or social system. And change will occur when you have critical mass. That's when you have enough impetus to sustain a chain reaction, like a drop of, like, remember chemistry class from high school? For some of us, it was high school, where you have to add drop, 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 and suddenly a chain reaction occurs in the chemistry. So this is a similar idea. And the end result of this diffusion is that people who are part of a social system adopt a new idea or behavior. And adoption means that a person does something differently than what they had previously done. A key to adoption is that the idea must be perceived as new or innovative. And it's through that diffusion is possible. So we're here talking to some of you who are innovators and early adopters already, and others may be preparing for change. But what we know is that for innovations to become a part of a system, it's a process. It takes time, it takes experimentation. And that curve that you're looking at is always shifting with new innovations spreading. And what that means is there's no endpoint. There is no "we have arrived" moment. We're in a constant state of change. And this is the key to growth and to building an entirely new system that values health, equity, and justice. And a key thing that we need to be diffusers of innovation is the importance of taking strategic risks. The ideas on this slide come from, of all places, a Forbes magazine article called "Take a Risk, the Odds Are Better Than You Think." And the key takeaway, I'm going to paraphrase the author here, is that in interviewing people about their careers, she found that they wished they had taken more risks. They wished they had settled less and spoken up more often. In short, they wished they'd been more courageous in the risks they'd taken. She says, often we know what it is we want to do, but we still don't do it. Why? Because we are innately risk averse and afraid of putting our vulnerability on the line. The status quo, while not particularly fulfilling, can seem like an easier, softer, less scary option. And she says that people often misjudge various elements in assessing risk. Specifically, we overestimate the probability of something going wrong. We exaggerate the consequences of what might happen if it does go wrong. We underestimate our ability to handle the consequences of risk, and we discount or deny the cost of inaction and sticking with the status quo. And so I really, I encourage you to, excuse me, work through these questions. It is risky to bring up oppression and power and to try and change the conversation and join in movements, but leaders being trained to focus on what can go right as opposed to what can go wrong could lead to more transformative practice. All right, the next slide, I want to say everyone wants tools and resources. There is no shortage of tools and resources. I will make another plug for our very own tools that are online that can help you operationalize health equity. But there are others, there's many, many others, that this is a proliferating field. And I'll drop in the chat one of them. But if you go to our Human Impact Partners resource page, you'll see many, many. And one that we really love is our Health Equity Guide. So if you go to the next slide, the Health Equity Guide is an online tool which is structured around a set of 15 strategic practices in these 4 domains. And so I really encourage you to check out the website, dive into these actions. We have case studies, we have resources to advance practices. And so I'm going to drop the link in to that, which you can go to in your time, healthequityguide.org. And I don't want to waste a moment more. Sorry, let's go to the previous slide, Stephanie. This is an image of many, many tools, including our Health Equity Guide, but also including a language use guide by Race to Justice, an equity in an inclusion lens guide. There's many, many racial equity impact assessment guides, surveys, budgeting tools, resource allocation tools. So all that was to say, there are resources. There are many, many resources.